The baby quilt is cut out for my brand new granddaughter, and it's time to start sewing the quilt top. So join me in my sewing room and quilt with me. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue at Kowalski Mountain and welcome back to the homestead. Now Philip and I are expecting our 6th grandchild very soon, and it's time for me to start putting together the baby quilt. Now admittedly I waited much too long, so I have a really tight deadline to get my quilt done. Now I'm creating a series with this quilting project, and this is a template cut quilt. So it's a little bit different than the quilts that I've shared in the past. Now if you've missed the start of the series where I cut out the quilt, you can see that right up here. Now today we need to start piecing this quilt. Now this is going to be challenging. I really considered whether I wanted to take this on, but we're going to jump, and I think it's going to be great. So the reason this is going to be challenging is because my block has a round component to it. Now my daughter Faith is quite the planner, and she actually picked out the theme for her quilt for me, which took some of the guesswork out. Now she wanted a wildflower quilt. Now in doing that, I wanted a quilt pattern that had a flower. Now most flowers are round, not all of them, but many. And so this quilt block has got some round components. Now where that gets tricky is in the piecing. I'm worried about several parts of this. I know how to sew, and I've made some beautiful things, but I'm not an amazing seamstress. I am an okay seamstress. I know enough to be dangerous and to jump into things that maybe are above my level, but I'm going to figure it out anyway. And this might be one of those projects. These pieces are going to be some of the worst, and the flower itself. And the reason is because these are diamond-shaped pieces. So this is going to be more stretchy. Now I tried to cut these nice and straight, not cutting across the grain where I didn't have to, so that these won't stretch. Because when I'm sewing, if I stretch this fabric and I let it go, it's going to pucker up. Now with a round quilt like this, I can press and kind of work through some of the issues, but puckering I can't press out. Puckering is bad, and puckering has only one solution. This is my seam ripper. Now if this is the first time you've seen one of my videos, and the first time you've seen one of my sewing videos, you don't know my motto. I have a motto, and if you're learning how to sew, go ahead and embrace this motto because it's going to save you a lot of frustration. The seam ripper is my friend. Now it never feels like a friend because no one likes to pull out their seams. But it is a friend because correcting a mistake in a project like this stops the process from continuing. If I don't correct a mistake, then the mistakes just get bigger because they build on each other. So remember that. The seam ripper is your friend. Now today we're going to go ahead and start piecing this quilt. Now the good part is this is the largest blocks I've ever put into a baby quilt before, so I only have to make 6 of these blocks. And I'm pretty relieved about that. 6 is going to be plenty. Now the pattern I'm using today came from the book P.S. I Love You, and it's a baby collection. And this quilt is called Garden Song, and that fits my wildflower theme. Now I have some cool fabrics. Even though I'm making a quilt out of a book, I have some things up my sleeve to make my quilt extra special for my new granddaughter, Rose Marie. Now this is a Brother sewing machine, and when I bought it, probably close to 30 years ago, not quite 30 years, but pretty close. This is the only sewing machine I've ever owned. It wasn't an expensive machine. It was just a affordable machine for me. And it's been giving me some trouble with tension and the tightness of the stitches. Now I've had it to be serviced several times and that never seems to get better. The bad part is I don't sew enough to warrant a new sewing machine. So I don't buy one, I just deal with it. And I don't sew because my sewing machine doesn't sew beautifully, which means I might sew more if I had a better machine. So it's kind of a catch-22. Now the first thing I'm going to do before I get started is I'm going to go ahead and fill up another bobbin. Maybe I'll do 2. Your bobbin always runs out of thread at the most inconvenient time. So I'm going to go ahead and fill some of these up first. Now that that's done, I need to switch that setting off and thread my machine. Now most sewing machines thread pretty similar, but if you don't know how to thread your machine, be sure to check out your owner's manual because it's sure to tell you. I would almost bet you can find a YouTube video for pretty much any machine you need to thread. Now my pattern book has some pretty simple instructions. The first pieces I'm going to assemble are going to be the flower petals. So I need to go ahead and make the flower petals, sew them together. With any quilt, you want to do a lot of pressing. You want to press your seams. That's a really important step. Now when you're quilting, you always do 1/4 inch seams, and that's really easy because your presser foot is 1/4 inch wide. So you can just put your fabric along the edge of your presser foot and keep it nice and even. So here's our first one. Okay, so now I have the first 8, and now I need to sew these last 2 together to complete the first flower. Ta-da! Here's the first flower. Now a really important part of quilting is pressing and sewing in general, and no one likes to press. I don't like to press, but it's really necessary. So let me get this iron heating up and press this piece. Now honestly, this is not laying as nicely as I would like to see it. Now this could be like my marker was a little bit thick when I cut my template, so that made them just a hair larger than they need to be. I really would have liked those to lay a little bit nicer, but it's not bad. In all honesty, it's not bad. Now this is where it's gonna get hard. I'm not even sure how to do this, honestly. Okay, I gotta figure this out. Remember, my friend, I'm gonna go for it and see what happens. Why did I do that? Let's try again. Not bad. Not bad. Now I really would have rather pressed the seam away from the white. Because you can kind of see it through. You see how you can see it? I'm not sure I can. Okay. Now, to repeat what I did. I got to figure out what it was. There are a lot of these. There are, I think, 48 of these diamonds to set. 48. Not bad. Not bad. 2 down, 46 to go. I have to be honest, I think this is the hardest quilt I've ever done. And I've made a double wedding ring. I don't think it was this hard. It was a long time ago though, so maybe I forgot the trauma. I hope my oldest granddaughter Addison watches this video, because Addison did a sewing project with me this summer. And she was very excited to do that sewing project, but she wanted to use the sewing machine. She didn't like all the cutting and the pressing, and I couldn't even find my iron then, so she didn't get to press anything. She didn't like all the pinning and all of those steps, and I told her that most of sewing is all of these steps, not the actual sewing part. And while it might seem excessive that I am pinning this with about half a dozen pins per 2 inches, I don't think it is. Slow and steady wins the race. Okay, it's 4:30. I gotta go take care of some animals, and then I'm gonna come back to this. Take a break. I got the first one done. Now it's definitely not perfect, but I'm happy with it, and we're ready to go on to the next piece. Now the next piece that goes on here is the corner piece. It's going to square up the block to make it a square block that'll be a lot easier to sew together. So there's just 4 of these pieces. This should not be too difficult. Perfect. And I even didn't cut off my point. Points on a quilt are where the triangles meet, and I hit that right on there. Sometimes if you sew too closely, you'll cut it off, and so it'll be blunt. It won't be a point, and I did not cut it off. Good, 3 more of these. This is our 10-inch block, and I know it's missing the center. The center is going to be appliqued on. We're not going to do that with a machine. It's going to be hand sewn on, and I'm going to do all of them at the same time. So for now, that's going to be left just like that. And I've got 5 more to go. Well, it's day 2 of piecing the quilt top. Now, I finished another block last night, so I have 2. And this one I made a mistake with. I was trying to mix the color pattern up a little bit so everyone wouldn't be exactly the same, and I accidentally put 2 of the same fabric in the block, and I didn't see it till I was completely finished with the block. Now I was just gonna leave it because this is not easy to put together, but it was bugging me. So I went ahead and I took out the offending piece and put in a different piece, and I bet you can't tell where it is. It went back pretty good. So it's not perfect, but it definitely went back together easier than I expected, so it was worth the effort. I figured I had nothing to lose. I could either try to fix it or I could do a whole nother one, and that was more daunting than what I wanted to do. Now today's goal is to finish the other 4 blocks, and then we're going to go on to the next step. Now to make sure I don't do that again, that same mistake, I went ahead and I made little stacks of petals so I know which petals are going to go together. And I went ahead and I laid it out to just put my eyes on it and to make sure everything was good before I did any sewing. Because even though my seam ripper is my friend, I don't enjoy using it. So let's try not to do that again. I finished all 6 of the blocks, and as I was doing this, this reminds me of a block called a Dresden plate. Now I looked up a Dresden plate and I kind of wish I had done that. A Dresden plate is an applique pattern. It would have this point exactly like this, but it wouldn't have been pieced, it would have been appliqued, and I think it would have been easier than this, but it's done. These 48 little diamonds were very difficult, but they got easier as I did them, and they are all done now. Now, in thinking about how I want to quilt this, I like to quilt with a technique called stitch in the ditch. And what that means is I would stitch right here in the seam line of every blade of the flower, and that'll kind of give it some dimension to look like a flower. Now this piece has a center section on it. If you remember from the first video, we cut out the template for the center section, and that's going to go right here in the middle. As I was thinking about how I would quilt it, I thought that it would be better to quilt it before I put that center section over, because that section is going to be done with an applique. And I don't want to mess it up with the machine quilting. So I reached out to a friend of mine who has a blog called Sew Nikki, and you can check that out down in the description box. And I asked her opinion if she thought that I could add this applique after I did the quilting. And she agreed with me that that would be fine, but I expressed to her my concerns about this center hole. And she confirmed with me as well that I really need something here in the center to give some stability to this block. So what I did was I went ahead and I cut out some circles using my template, and I folded them in fourths so that I ironed it. So I would have a center where I can see exactly where the center of the block is. Now with those ironing marks, I can put this circle underneath. And that way I can tell that that circle is perfectly centered in that hole. Now I'm just going to go through and pin it down. Now I want to be sure when I'm pinning it that I'm not pulling it, that I'm not tugging it, because they stretch more easily than straight cuts. So that's the whole reason of sewing this down, so I don't have to worry about it stretching during the rest of the quilting process. Now using a needle and thread, I'm going to baste this into place. And I want to be careful that as I'm doing this, that I'm not gathering it. So every few stitches, I do a back stitch to try to prevent it from gathering. Now all of these stitches are going to be underneath the center applique, so no one's going to see it. It doesn't matter that it's not perfect or pretty. It doesn't matter that these raw edges are here. We're just securing it so that this block has some stability through the rest of the process. So here's my center section. Now that that's basted down and I know it's not going to move, I'm going to go ahead and secure it with the sewing machine. All right, so now that's in there. Those petals are going to stay exactly where they are. Now I'm going to go ahead and press this and get it ready for the next step. Now this has been a full day finishing these blocks and getting the center sections completed. Tomorrow we will go on to piecing the quilt top.